Hello, everyone. Today I want to talk about a book, A Billion Wicked Thoughts, What the Internet Tells Us About Sexual Relationships by two researchers, Ogas and Gaddam. This book was published in 2012, and it's a pretty hot topic, so warning. There is going to be mention of adult material and adult contents in this review, so if you have small children running around, you might want to put a pause on this and listen to this review later. Now, I want to front this entire review with a quote. "The sexual brain is guaranteed to upset the politically correct, the socially conservative, just about everybody in between." This quote really stands out to me from the book because it really does encapsulate the whole question mark that we might have about sexual relationships or sexual desire in specific. I was chuckling over this warning in their preface because I do think it's really true that what women and men actually desire, what they secretly desire and why, has become very, very hot today, right? There's a lot of people talking about men and women are totally the same. Men and women are absolutely not the same, and everything in between. And as someone who has been standing from the outside looking in on everything related to sex experiences and desire, I always wondered, why are people feeling these feelings when they see something that they like? And why are people driven to desperate, wonderful, crazy, stupid, and terrible actions over physical or sexual desire? What do people want? Why do people want it? And even more importantly, what does the brave new world of the internet tell us about people's desires? So these two researchers first began with discussing the mode of data acquisition on which they're basing their findings, which is internet data mining. So they rightfully point out that science and its related disciplines like psychology, sociology, etc., have always had to contend with the difficulty of data acquisition. Ogas and Gaddam, who are two neuroscientists graduated from Boston University, they have come upon a solution because they knew going into this research that human desire has always been difficult to really analyze and break down. Basically, you can imagine what things might be like if you gathered a group of people and said, "Hey, we want you to go hog wild in this room. And this room has two-way mirrors and cameras." There's an aspect where are the behaviors of the humans within the room, however exhibitionist they might be, are they truly indicative of how people process desire and attraction? Ogas and Gaddam, right. Science hasn't been able to answer this question because there just hasn't been a way to observe the natural sexual behavior of large numbers of women and men until now. So according to these two researchers, Ogas and Gaddam, internet anonymity has released humankind into a new area of freedom. And in this arena that we know as the internet, humans are able to explore and satiate personal forms of desire. And the foundational takeaway is that male and female desire appears to be different, generally speaking. Now, when I say generally speaking, I need to be very clear here. When we are talking about male and female desire from this point onward, we're speaking about generalities. That is to say that a majority of men and women behave a certain way, but there are exceptions to the rules, and the entire system, as it were, of cues and desires is complex, so it can look a little bit different in every individual. I highly recommend reading this book to get all of the details, but generally speaking, there is some generalities that can be made about men and women. And this is where the politically correct can get their hackles up, because a lot of feminists have been urging us to believe that male and female have equal value, and they have sometimes gone down the road of saying that men and women, physically speaking, are the same, when that is absolutely not true. And even more untrue is the idea that men and women process things in their brain the same way. There is a level where how they process things is the same. That is to say, there are similar chemicals in male and female brains. There's similar electrical charges and neurons and things going on inside the brain. But how these signals are sent is actually quite different between male and female, as a rule, generally speaking. Quoting Donald Simmons, Ogas and Gaddam say, "It is clear that human beings evolved psychological mechanisms for detecting and assessing cues of mate value that are independent of other people's preferences and are highly resistant to cultural modification. These mechanisms account for a very large proportion of individual variability in attractiveness." Essentially, I think this is just very important to consider and accept to a certain degree, because right now there are a lot of people running around saying things like, you're a phobe if you don't like this certain type of genitalia. And the reality is that humans are going to want what they want. And there's no amount of shaming or social guilting that's going to get a man to accept somebody who's passing as a woman, but who still has male genitalia. You're not going to get a straight male to accept that female because the genitalia is simply not there. There are other things that might even be missing that they're not going to find attractive. So no matter how much we might want to be compassionate or be understanding about certain socio-cultural realities, humans are going to human. And how are we going to know how these humans are going to human? Well, we can look at what they're actually doing. And using dogpile, a form of data mining, Ogas and Gaddam set out to see if Simon's theory about cues of desire within men and women held. And that's what this book is about. So after dealing with the general concepts and, going through their preface, the book launches into all kinds of discussions about desire and how this physical desire is stimulated in male and female brains. So in chapter 2, they discuss male visual cues, chapter 3, male desire, chapter 4, female desire, chapter 5, female psychological cues, number 1, the hero, chapter 6, female psychological cues 2, the heroine, chapter 7, gay cues, chapter 8, female visual cues, chapter 9, male psychological cues, and chapter 10, human psychological cues, and chapter 11, the creative power of cues, and then the conclusion. I'm just going to say in general summary that I enjoyed this book quite a bit, particularly when I realized that a quarter of it had been dedicated to detailed references and extra notes. The result of the experience reading this was that of intrigue and discovery, secure in the knowledge that research had been done. So for me to go into detail about my reactions to all of this would take quite a bit of time and a whole other, super long video altogether. However, I will set some space aside here to take note of some things that particularly stood out to me. So let's buckle in, shall we? Number 1, something that really stood out to me was the fundamental differences between males and females. I had known this consciously and unconsciously for a long time, that men and women are fundamentally different when it comes to how and why their desires are processed. Ogas and Gaddam suggest in this quote, "It wasn't just the behaviors of men and women that seemed different. Their brains seemed different too. Why did so many big pharma and biotech companies fail to find female Viagra? The answer also explains Hatfield and Clark's dramatic results." So the question is, why can't women just turn it on, like the way men experience? So these physiological and psychological connections are apparently in the brain. Citing a study run by Meredith Chivers from Queen's University, Canada, Ogas and Gaddam discuss and conclude that when it came to viewing erotic pictures for women, there was a disassociation between the conscious arousal of the mind and the unconscious or semi-conscious arousal of the body. On the other hand, for men, if a man was physically turned on, he was also psychologically turned on. As a result, Meredith Chivers and Ogas and Gaddam conclude it psychological and physical arousal are usually linked in men, but in women there's a disconnect. It's as if the carnal signals from a woman's body somehow get cut off before they enter her conscious awareness. Male sexuality, in contrast, is like the knee-jerk reflex. A message of arousal from the body triggers instant mental desire. Elmer Fudd readies, aims, and fires at the slightest hint of a wabbit. Okay, so I want to unpack this just a little bit because right now, at the moment, we're having a lot of talk, especially like in the red pill community and the woke community, about how men and women are behaving, right? So we got a lot of, for example, we got a lot of men looking at OnlyFans women. And they're assuming that all of these women are just, this new kind of woman who are just super lecherous and have no control of their desires. I would actually argue that a lot of the OnlyFans women or a lot of these so-called sexually free women are actually more than likely going through motions. And quite a few of them are probably faking it, right? Like, especially if you're in the industry, you're faking it until you make it, basically. Now, it is very possible for women to feel very connected to their body and to get aroused and to be very attracted to men. But in general, it is not by any means automatic for women. And so when a lot of women turn around and blame men for, struggling to control their desires, a lot of women who might not understand what is going on in a male brain might be wondering, why can't you just control it? The answer is a man can over time learn how to manage his instant knee-jerk reflexes, but it takes maturity, it takes self-control, it takes a certain amount of stoicism or self-discipline that women don't realize is not a second nature or a biological nature for men. So women need to calm down when dudes are, responding quite quickly to something that they see that they find to be attractive. But at the same point in time, men also need to understand that usually if you're looking at a woman who is carrying on a certain way or saying certain things, that this is not necessarily a sign that she's actually feeling it. She might be simply faking it until she makes it. And men, especially from the red pill movement, who expect to get this, virgin woman who will be the mother of their children and will answer to their sexual needs, fairly quickly. These guys need to understand that women do not just turn on like men. No matter how much these feminists, how much these OnlyFans people are telling us that women are highly sexual creatures, women are real general females, normal females, are actually having to process desire and sexual interest in a different way from a man. And so men can't just expect their female partner to always just be there for them whenever they want them. Now, this, of course, has led to obvious social issues. So, for example, men who can't be bothered to learn how to, awaken their partner properly will end up, for example, doing, let's say, very non-consensual stuff in the bedroom between husbands and wives, which can happen. Some men may give up on women altogether, considering them difficult, considering the act to be too much work, and will settle for, living on their own and pleasing themselves. Some extreme cases show men encouraging each other and encouraging themselves to just, invest in sex dolls. And the reality is that men do have this instantaneous trigger, as it will, but women do not. And so this fundamental difference between the sexes is probably one of the most important keys that any person who wants a real relationship with the opposite sex, they're going to have to figure out and understand that the other person is not perceiving the world the same way that they are. And this is determined largely by biological sex. I do think, nurture has an impact on this. Psychology probably has an impact on how this is processed, how this is lived out. But in general speaking, males are more physically turned on through the eye gate, as my father would say. They see something, they are aroused, period. Women see something goes on in the woman's brain. And then eventually, if certain conditions are met, then they are aroused. So let's talk about these two very different dynamics in more detail. Ogas and Gaddam break these two different approaches or processes, if you will, down to two archetypes, Elmer Fudd and the Miss Marple Detective Agency. So Elmer Fudd is the male physical desire process. He sees something and it instantaneously translates to psychological and physical arousal. Usually these visual cues are very simple, like booty or boobs or something. And this means that when a man sees something, his desire is instantly turned on, or if the picture is disgusting, turned off. Picturing something disgusting actually affects male desire. On the other hand, women are relying on something like the Miss Marple Detective Agency. They require more than just seeing something that they like. So women can see something that they like. They could be like, oh, that man's hot. But what men don't understand is that when a woman is like, oh, that guy's hot, that actually is fizzling out somewhere in her brain because it's entering the check stage, the checkpoint. And this checkpoint is going to be looking at a variety of things that need to be checked off before a woman will feel aroused, like all the way. And what are these checkpoints? Well, like, for example, security, intimacy, information, the woman's mental health, the woman's physical health at that point. There are a lot of things that a woman requires to have checked off before she's ready and raring to go based off of what she's just seen. Ogas and Gaddam quote Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan apparently stated in some interview or some discussion on his podcast, he said, "Booty is so strong. There are dudes willing to blow themselves up for the highly unlikely possibility of booty in another dimension. There are no chicks alive willing to blow themselves up for a penis." Now, that's a bit of a joke, right? It's a bit of a joke, but there is a small amount of truth there in the sense that men are very, very driven by desire to a certain degree, whereas women are driven by other psychological processes. And Ogas and Gaddam trace this difference between the male and female to the evolutionary past. They say, all modern women are the fruit of feminine caution, the result of this whittling away of the impulsive branches of our ancestral maternal tree is a female brain equipped with the most sophisticated neural software on Earth. So Ogas and Gaddam break the agency down into 4 detectives: the emotional, the social, the cultural, and the physical detective. So let's take a look at these 4 detectives. The emotional detective attempts to understand what the man is actually feeling in the moment. Ogas and Gaddam cite 3 sources that point to this idea that women think about or overthink negative experiences more often, recall memory more quickly, recall their lives more deeply, and express their emotions more expressively than men. And most of this is due to biological differences within the brain. Like, there is actual differences with how signals are sent within the brain. And this kind of focus on the emotions, on experiences, on memory is a way for a woman to project things onto the men or attempt to assess things from the man. And this is why women are always asking men annoying questions or are, checking them out or as we know from the social detective, are networking to understand the man on a deeper level. So the social detective attempts to understand the man through social networking, either talking to him or talking about him with other people. This is one of the reasons why women dominate social networking sites like Facebook and Classmates. After further discussing the woman's biological brain, Ogas and Gaddam add, there are also more connections between the female language centers and the subcortical reward systems, suggesting that talking is more rewarding for women than for men. Female brains also have greater connectivity between the two cortical hemispheres, leading some neuroscientists to speculate that the female brain is designed for more effective processing and production of language. So between the emotional and the social detective, we have women who are extremely interested in people. This is where this concept of people being a focus for women, right? Women enjoy working with people, men enjoy working with things. And the reason is that women are rewarded for talking within their brain. They are rewarded mentally and psychologically with social activities. And women are actually built on some level within their brain. They've developed to a certain stage where their brains are actually firing messages between the hemispheres faster than in males. And I remember my mom having a book that I think touched on this. And there was this discussion about how, like, I don't know if it's linked to testosterone washes or what can happen. Now, does this mean that there aren't some men who have this ability? Absolutely. There are these men, I would say maybe 25% of men or like a third of men have this high emotional, high social detective abilities within their brains. Their brains are perhaps more connected. Perhaps they had less of a testosterone wash and they are able to process quickly as a woman would. But women in general are going to have more abilities within this emotional social spectrum. Now, the cultural detective is most easily seen on female porn sites, which have more political and socially positive messages than their male counterparts. Ogas and Gaddam state, keenly attuned to cultural values and social roles, the detective agency asks which behaviors and relations are celebrated and which are frowned upon. What values should I endorse when it comes to sex and relationships? Women are sensitive to messages on magazines and television shows, even indirect messages, such as a model's body weight, the car a politician is driving, or celebrities' views on mental health. Subjects that elicit more online comments from women than men. Women are also much more likely to attribute sexual anxiety to social pressures. Ogas and Gaddam cite Baumeister, who suggests that women playing it safe is the result of a long evolutionary and historical trend that allowed women to stay home, choose the best man, and reproduce their genes. This has resulted in 80% of women reproducing their genes versus 40% of men. In short, have you ever wondered why is there so much cultural and sociocultural and political messaging in crap these days? Why is it that everyone's trying to make a point with our writing? It's not actually, in my opinion, just simply some kind of cultural Marxist hidden agenda. That could indeed be part of the case. But another part of the case is that a lot of women are now dominating the writing industry. And the reality is that women cannot help but promote either their own values or celebrate the values that they share with other creatives. And essentially, I have read fan fiction where the writer has been doing this great story, and then there's this lapse into what she thinks should be happening about this cultural hot topic or that cultural hot topic. And women who read this, you would think women would get annoyed. You would think that women would be like, oh, geez, this writer is preaching at me. Well, for some women like myself, yes, that is annoying. We get annoyed. But a large portion of women will feel comforted and will say, oh, this writer agrees with me about how I view the situation. They will support and like the writer more, and they will enjoy the stories more. They will feel safer because the story fits within their own values and their own ideas about the world. And so, yeah, this is just a very interesting correlation, I think, I think it would be beneficial for us to understand more how women's need to have this cultural detective at work has actually impacted even how romances are written these days, or what kinds of romances are written these days, or how many romances are written these days. And what is also very interesting is that men, when it's about getting turned on, men aren't sitting there going, does this girl's views align with my own political views? Let's all be real here. Now, there are a lot of people on, let's say, Asmongold's chat who are trying to tell themselves that they're super based and they're just looking for a wife. But the reality is, as we know from listening to Asmongold and from looking at the chat and from hearing some of the interactions on there, that a lot of men are looking in the wrong places for the wrong women. And that in reality, a lot of men just want to enjoy themselves. They just want to have a fantasy. And so, generally speaking, most guys are just going to look at a chick, separate from the surrounding issues of, let's say, an IP. And they're just going to be like, yeah, she's hot. Now, of course, once again, some guys prefer realistic drawings. Some guys prefer porn. Some guys prefer waifus. But as long as everything looks good and is super hot, they will interact with media from various places. In fact, I would argue that the fact that certain men are now reacting to current entertainment issues with such, vociferous feelings, right? There's a lot of men who are upset about what's happening to IPs and things. And no matter how many times these, woke creatives try to cram a pretty girl in there, for a lot of guys, I think the situation has gotten to a point where even they are starting to withdraw despite the eye candy that's put on display. And of course, woke people are then shooting themselves in the foot by not even putting the candy on display. They're now trying to be realistic and show women of all body types. And yes, there are men who are attracted to overweight girls, by the way. That is a cue that Ogas and Gaddam touch on. However, generally speaking, there are certain waist-hip ratios that men are attracted to visually. And as a result, even men who might be seeing some kind of eye candy that they might ordinarily find attractive because of other things that have been building up over time within their lives, they even can't enjoy those things that are being presented to them anymore. So that just tells you how bad things have gotten, because most of the time guys aren't the ones worrying about this. Usually it's only women. But yeah, here's what we got. We got women who need to not only feel like they're emotionally in the moment, they not only have to feel like they understand and know the guy in front of them, or think that they know or feel like they know this person in front of them. Not only do they have to feel like the situation surrounding this person is fulfilling their internal cultural values, but then there's the physical detective that evaluates the woman's physical readiness for sexual intimacy and reproduction. So if their woman is feeling stressed, or is not feeling safe, or is feeling sick, or whatever, she's just not going to be able to proceed with how she sees someone and then how she feels about them. So stress, shelter, safety, and nutrition are important factors for a woman's choice. This is not the same as men, who often experience enhanced desire under physical threats. So yeah, even women who are in a BDSM space have to feel safe, and there has to be consent. There has to be a level of a sense of, I'm ready for this, I'm feeling good, I'm physically doing well, I want to get into this. Now, of course, there are what we would call certain kinds of fantasies that women might have about non-consensual encounters. Ogas and Gaddam also touch on that and correctly contextualize it in terms of, I believe, the female's animus. So the female's animus is moving towards a masculine space, and in that sense, there is this dual push and pull of wanting security, but also wanting to have that kind of risk or feeling alive, and that can lead some women to consume certain material that some people might view to be illegal, shall we say. Another very interesting concept, besides the whole male-female difference, is how men and women process images and language. So another interesting thing is that this social detective and this emotional detective basically centers a woman firmly within language, whereas men are more image-based. And this has led to women turning to literature for fulfillment of their desires, while men enjoy, let's just say, pornography in terms of pictures and videos. This language-focused processing in females has resulted in a very specific cultural trend: romance fiction and fan fiction. Quoting Ogas and Gaddam, according to the Romance Writers of America, romance fiction generated 1.37 billion sales in 2008. The romance genre has the single largest share of the fiction market. More people buy romances than detective novels, thrillers, science fiction, or science nonfiction. At least 74.8 million people read a romance novel in 2008, and more than 90% of these readers are women. I think the big takeaway is that both men and women are definitely very much interested in stimulating desire, but how women are going about it is completely different from men. And this is where I think, I'm not saying we should be running purity tests for men and women, because like I said, this is generally speaking. There are going to be some women who enjoy porn. There are going to be some men who love reading. So this is generally speaking. We can assess how much a person is going one way or another, even by how they consume or how they pursue their sexual desires. Ogas and Gaddam noted that not all romance novels have sexual content, and even erotic romance novels, books with sex as a primary component, quote, would never be mistaken for the emotionless, graphic raunch of male-targeted erotica, end quote. They also trace a common trend in both fiction and fan fiction romances: an alpha male hero. So this is where things get interesting. So basically, if a man was writing erotica, it actually looks and sounds different than if it was written for females or written by females. Very fascinating. And women centralize their writing around a specific trope, which is the alpha male hero. Psychologists Mary Ann Fisher and Tammy Meredith discuss the presence of a strong male image in female romances, noting the, quote, 10 most common professions of the hero, end quote, are doctor, cowboy, boss, prince, rancher, knight, surgeon, king, bodyguard, and sheriff. Conspicuously absent from the list of romance heroes are, quote, blue-collar works, bureaucrats, and traditionally feminine professions. Quote, all of the heroes' professions are associated with status, confidence, and competence. As Henry Kissinger famously said, power is the ultimate aphrodisiac. Power is a reflection of a man's rank in the dominance hierarchy, and women are attracted to men near the top. The man at the very top is known as the alpha male. Okay, so we could imagine, for example, there's some kind of a pyramid. You got an alpha male, which is a man who is wealthy, rich, successful, famous, and handsome. And then underneath, you'll have various levels. You'll have, men who are, let's say, famous and rich, but are not handsome. Or you'll have handsome men who are extremely charismatic and famous, but not rich. Essentially, a lot of women, when they talk about what is really stimulating their attraction or what is really making them pursue certain physical experiences, a lot of women talk about it very poorly, right? Because not a lot of people understand how to talk about what they're experiencing. And so a lot of men listening in on women get the message that, oh, I have to be rich, and I have to be famous, and I have to be successful, and I have to be handsome, and I have to be this, and I have to be that. And the answer is yes, but the actual truth is that women want a competent man, and he doesn't have to be handsome, and rich only needs enough money to support a family. Okay, so for some countries, that's going to look different as opposed to other countries. It might depend on the individual. Some people these days think that you need a ton of money to raise kids. Once again, it depends on your country, the social programs within them, whether there's a recession going on or not, and all of that kind of stuff. I definitely know that it is possible. I know this from experience. It is possible to raise a family on very, very little, but it can mentally and emotionally impact you, just the stress. What I can tell you is that there are, when it comes to idealized forms that trigger desire within women, the key factors for the ultimate man is wealth, competency, badassness, protective, and gentle within. Okay, and this is just being ripped out of the content of your average woman's very average romance novel. And if you think about it that way, the popularity of books like Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey makes sense, right? Now, I think 50 Shades of Grey is terrible. And definitely Christian Grey is a whacknut. But the point of 50 Shades of Grey is that it's a Beauty and the Beast kind of situation where Anastasia eventually tames, if you will, Christian Grey, even as Christian Grey dominates her. It is very poorly written. It is confused. It is dangerous, ultimately, I think, in some aspects. But the tropes are there. And there's a reason why women thought this was a great book. And once again, this is just idealism. Your average woman with her feet on the ground knows the difference between this idealistic picture of a man and what she's actually going to get. Okay, so your average woman actually is going to, air quote, settle, air quote, for less, end quote, right? You're going to have most normal people, that includes men, right, who are, obsessed with their waifus. These men are going to understand, okay, if I'm going to get an H-cup woman at some point, her boobs are going to respond to gravity and sag. So it doesn't, just because you have an ideal doesn't mean that's going to determine what's going to actually happen in your life. However, mental illness being an issue, entitlement being an issue, princess syndrome being an issue, yeah, there are going to be women online who are going to make waves because they're going to say stupid shit. Like, I need a man who makes 50,000 pounds a month, blah, blah, blah. Like, a man who doesn't have his retirement fund or whatever set isn't going to get in bed with me, right? So you got all of these women who, let's say, are not very high on the desirability scale, having this kind of entitled, desperate, demanding expectations of their male counterparts and no apparent work being done on their end, shall we say. However, let's all be real here. Most normal women who are not getting the clicks because they're living their normal life and they're largely invisible, just like the normal men are largely invisible. A lot of these women will enjoy a romance where the man is going to be rich, competent, badass, protective. But one of the key factors is being gentle within. And so for most women, I think the rich part, the handsome part, those are important. But most importantly, especially if this is a woman who wants to have children, they're looking for someone who is competent. That means they'll hold down a job and they'll come home and they'll put out the garbage and they won't just put their feet up and watch some TV with a beer and expect her to be waiting on him hand and foot. They're looking for a partner. And they're looking for a partner who will protect them and who is gentle within, but on the outside has this external tough person. This is where I think a lot of pickup artists make a mistake, because or like the stupid pickup artists, shall I say, because they mistake what women are saying when the women say, "Oh, I want a badass. I want an outgoing, aggressive guy. I want this alpha male." They're mistaking that because what a woman wants is a man who can hold his shit together, but when the moment calls for it, can be emotionally vulnerable and soft and sweet and gooey when the time is right. And incidentally, a woman's own psychological journey is that she has to learn to stand up for herself. So a man who is in a mentally good state, who is actually looking for a wife, like Sargon of Akkad was talking about it in a recent video. And if a man is looking for an actual woman to be a wife and a mother, he is going to be looking for someone who is in the process of, having this sweetness, having this gentleness, having this motheringness, but at the same time also is able to think for herself and fend for herself when necessary. He's not going to want a weight on his back all the time. So this is where I think it's really, really important to understand that it's not so clear cut for, I think, either sex. I think both sexes are talking about this all wrong, and they're sending the wrong signals to people about what they're really looking for. Anyway, I could go on and on and on about what this book is saying. How male ego and female self-esteem are represented, how the desire to be irresistible may be the source of fantasies, how gay men are a combination of male and female desire processes, and how vampires and werewolves represent the desirable male in female romance novels. But I'm going to stop here. Suffice to say, whether you agree with Ogas and Gaddam's reason for why things appear to be the way they are, or whether these processes do in fact exist or not, I think this book is a must-read as a source of challenge and an interesting perception on male and female desires as they stand from the perspective of data pulled from the internet. And this story, I think, is ages old, right? But the internet is carrying it onward, and as a result, I think this has provided us with an opportunity for a hair-raising, eye-opening analysis. And it's a much-needed analysis at this point in time, I think, especially when you have a lot of people running around telling other people what they may or may not find attractive. Like, men are men, women are women, and yes, there is some crossover. There is a spectrum. Some people change over time. Some people are traumatized. Some people have various nurture situations that have led them down one path or another. But I think Ogas and Gaddam are touching on some very basic generalities that would be very helpful for both men and women to understand about each other. And maybe as a result, both sexes will be less judgy and will understand that whether or not, modern women are lying to themselves about certain things, or modern men are lying to themselves about certain things, ultimately, at the end of the day, when the rubber hits the road and, the biological clock starts ticking, when your true desires come knocking, I think men and women will always fall back into their natural biological desires. And Ogas and Gaddam's findings, I think, bear this out. So anyway, take a look at this book. I really enjoyed it. I rely on it a lot for thinking about how male and female psychology processes itself within the entertainment industry. And I would really be interested in hearing your thoughts. What do you think about what I touched on today? Would you like me to, go into the book more in detail? Let me know in the comments below. And I'll see you all next time.